Welcome to another edition of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We got over 5,300 fighter profiles for you to browse through, covering 20 different promotions from all over the world. Just a crazy amount of good things for you to check out there on this service. Again, if you do your own researching and like to watch fights and tape on these fighters before they compete on the weekends, the MMA Fight Archive is your one-stop shop to ensure you're getting as many direct links as possible for these fighters. And even with this ESPN Plus deal coming to a close, we have found alternative routes for you guys to still watch these fights before the UFC announces who their new partner will be. So make sure you guys check out the MMA Fight Archive 7-day free trial available for you to try it out for free. Make sure you guys check that out. It's the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. All right. This week, we're talking about UFC Atlanta, which is headlined by a big-time welterweight matchup between former welterweight champion Kamaru Usman taking on streaking welterweight contender Buckley, or Joaquin Buckley, however you want to pronounce it. He's looking to take out another former top-ranked welterweight in his previous fight, obviously dispatching of Colby Covington. And now this time he continues that tour of just, again, putting away these guys from the past era of the welterweight division and looking to assert himself at the top of the division so he can eventually get himself a title shot. Also, somebody looking to get a title shot is in the co-main event as Maverick looks to take on former strawweight champion Namajunas. It's not been the greatest of times for Namajunas at flyweight, and now she takes on a very stiff test here in Maverick. And the interesting thing about that fight is the fact that they were former training partners and have dozens of hours training with one another, and so they know kind of who is the better fighter, but we'll find out who actually can show up on the night of when they throw down in the co-main event this weekend. All right, before we get on over to the breakdowns, I do want to quickly recap this past weekend's event in terms of the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night play. Lock of the Night comes through for us as we have Jourdain Yu and Jekka Sergi under 1.5 hitting. I think it only took about 30 or 40 seconds for that to hit. Probably one of the easiest unders to hit, and we were able to cash that baby at plus 125. So very happy whenever I can hit a Lock of the Night play that are especially at underdog price. So we finally get over that hump of the 500 range for the Lock of the Night play, which has not been doing all that great this year, but again, momentum slowly seems to be on our side. With you cashing, that now brings our Lock of the Night record on the year to 23-22 for a 51% hit rate. We got more than half the year still to go. Let's see if we can continue striving for that 75 to 80% hit rate, but we're going to have to go on a bit of a heater. We're not chasing. We're just staying the course and trusting the reads as we normally do. Dog of the Night did not come through for us as Mark Choinski coming in on short notice going up against Markel Medeiros. Medeiros clearly improved his takedown defense and his grappling defense, especially after seeing what we saw when he took on Austin Hubbard earlier this year. Choinski was unable to get many dominant positions. He did get the back a few times, but ultimately it was not enough for him to get the win there. And even though we got him at plus 265 and he closed at plus 125 at the end of the day, for a lot of you, it just depends on whether we cash the ticket or not, and unfortunately, we did not. We still stay above 50% here with a 27-26 record on the year for Dog of the Night plays, which is now 51% hit rate, but still firmly entrenched in the profit. Very happy about that, especially as much as we've been dog hunting with these Dog of the Night plays. Reminder, this is a busy week for UFC events as well. We got PFL 5 going down on Thursday. We got LFA 210 going down on Friday. We got Octagon 72 and KSW 107 going down Saturday morning as an appetizer to the UFC card. So I will have video breakdowns for PFL, which I'm looking to drop tomorrow, aka Monday. So if it's already Monday, take a look on the YouTube page. It might already be posted. And then for the LFA card, I'll be looking to post that on on Thursday after the weigh-ins, once we get the confirmed card and everybody's weighed in and no fights have been canceled. So look for that on Thursday in the form of the Legacy Warriors podcast. And then for Octagon and KSW, those will only be written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. Full written breakdowns on all those fights, tracked plays for those as well. Let's see if we can keep the good times rolling by cashing some tickets over there, especially as an appetizer to the UFC card going down later on that day. So once again, make sure you guys check out the MMA Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. Not just for those Octagon and KSW breakdowns, but for all the track plays, for all the promotions that I cover, degenerate parlays, props, all that good stuff. I got you guys covered over there. So make sure you guys check that bad boy out. All right. Without wasting too much more time, we're going to get into the breakdowns here for this UFC Atlanta card, which currently has 13 fights scheduled, and it starts off in the flyweight division, where we got Jamie Lynn Horth taking on Vanessa Demopoulos. Big time favorite here in Horth as she comes in at minus 450. The return on the short notice Demopoulos, who's also coming up a weight class, comes in at plus 350. Now, starting off on the Horth side of things, she did manage to outfight her odds last time around as she made a very good account of herself against the woman in the home event here, Miranda Maverick. Last time around, Jamie Lynn Horth took on Maverick. I believe that was back in November, and Maverick got off on her game in the first round, but in the second round, the physicality of Horth really started to come through, and she was able to get some dominant positions of her own, and she even managed to sink in a few submission attempts, but ultimately Maverick's defense is held up, and then Maverick was able to get back to her game in the third round, ending up grinding out Horth and winning that fight on the scorecards. Horth has largely leaned on her physicality and her size and her strength to bully her opponents up against the cage or drag them to the ground and do some good work from that top position. She finished all of her opponents before coming over to the UFC, where she was able to put together a 5-0 record, and now she finds herself 2-2 through her 4 fights with the promotion. She's had some decent wins against Haley Cowan and Ivana Petrovic, and she's been very close to defeating Veronica Hardy and Miranda Maverick. She may not be a title contender, especially with her being 35 years old, but her physicality will always make it tough for a lot of opponents to have success against her. She's very durable, and she lacks some technical aspects in her game, but her physicality has allowed her to make up those flaws in her game and still be very competitive no matter who she goes up against. Now, things have not been the greatest for Vanessa Demopoulos as of late, as she has been 0-2 in her last 2 fights, losing to high-level BJJ black belts, the first of which was against Jacqueline Amarim, who was able to snatch up an armbar, not without some controversy. There was a little bit of a glove grab to set up the armbar, but the referee didn't see enough to actually overturn the decision there, and we saw Amarim actually end up getting her hand raised. In the next fight, Alan Carr was able to do a great job in terms of utilizing a grapple-heavy approach to really wear down Demopoulos, showcasing the flaws in Demopoulos' takedown defense game, as I believe Alan Carr went 4 or 5 on takedowns, but managed to control that fight for 12 and a half minutes out of the 15 minutes that they spent in the cage together. Demopoulos obviously has some very poor takedown defense, and even though she's a BJJ black belt, she just doesn't have all that much to offer off of her back, which makes her a little bit of a liability if she's unable to work back to her feet. There have been some fights where she squeezed out some very controversial decisions. She also has a lot of athleticism, which has kind of willed her to a lot of her victories. She throws with a lot of power and explosivity, although not a lot of her shots end up catching the target, which is why we see her kind of hitting the guard more often than not. But it's just been her ability to just stay athletic, stay explosive, that has made her more competitive than a lot of people expected her to be. I believe she's now 5-4 with the promotion, which is still a win for her, as a lot of people expected her to just go on a 2 or 3 fight losing streak when she made her debut and then end up getting cut from the promotion. But here she is still, 9 fights in the UFC. Credit to her for being able to hold on to a spot for this long. Unfortunately for her, this is a very bad decision, in my opinion, to take this short notice spot up a weight class when she finds herself at a 5-inch height disadvantage, as well as a 7-inch reach disadvantage against a much bigger and brooding Jamie Lynn Horth. I think we'll see Horth grind this fight out with relative ease, and Demopoulos might be able to get off on some offense from distance by treading the cage or treading the octagon side and just getting off on some kicks and some blitzing attacks. But I think it's just a matter of time before Horth gets a hold of her, pushes her up against the cage, maybe drags her to the ground a few times. She will have to be very careful about the submissions coming off of Demopoulos' back, but I don't think it's going to be anything threatening that Horth won't be able to overcome and eventually just grind and wear down Demopoulos, utilizing that size and strength advantage to win this fight on the scorecards. Minus 450 is a little wide, and knowing how Demopoulos always finds a way to make fights closer than they should be, maybe you should double think the chalky spot on Horth, but I have this weird gut confidence in Horth that she should be able to grind this out and win it on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got a welterweight matchup here between Phil Rowe, who comes in at plus 130, going up against Loosa, who comes in at minus 150. Starting on the Rowe side of things, he's on a 2-fight losing streak right now, as he last time came up short against Jake Matthews. Now, he had a decent first round where he was able to establish his range and land his jab at a consistent rate, but Matthews was able to start crashing the pocket more successfully in the second round, landing his big power hooks that seemed to land and cause more damage than whatever Rowe was throwing back in return. And then in this third round, we saw Rowe look to get to his grappling immediately, but he got his takedown attempt reversed, and we saw Matthews establish some top position before Rowe was able to pull off a reversal. But a minute or so later, we saw Matthews end up reversing the position as Rowe got a little too high on the back of Matthews, and that allowed Matthews to control the rest of that fight and clearly win it on the scorecards, at least rounds 2 and round 3. Previous to that, we saw Rowe get grinded out by Neil Magny with the classic Magny style of just pushing his opponents up against the cage, utilizing a lot of dirty boxing, knees up the middle, even some shoulder strikes to keep Rowe busy, and then we saw Magny just grind that fight out. That's where Rowe's found some issues, is when guys can keep him in some bad spots and nullify him from utilizing that 80-inch reach he brings to the table. But we're seeing when guys can trust their power, blitz the pocket effectively, they're able to crash that pocket and crowd the space of Rowe and land some big strikes, outweighing the pitter-patter jabs that we normally see from Rowe. Now, I'm not saying Rowe doesn't have power. You know, the 3-fight winning streak that he had from 2021 to 2022, it saw him finish all of his opponents in the second and third rounds with strikes. So he has some sting and some pop to his shots. It's all about establishing that range and continuing to move his feet so he doesn't get stuck in a spot where his opponents are closer than they should be, where they're able to land big shots, just as we saw Jake Matthews do last time around. Rowe has some decent BJJ, but I don't think it's anything super special, and I think we saw that on display when Matthews was able to shut him down from that top position. Now, his opponent here, Loosa, was on a 2-fight winning streak, I believe back in 2023, 2022, 2023, and then 2024, not all that great for him. He went in against Brian Battle first, and that was a matchup where he was unable to corral Battle, and it really seemed like the momentum was fully in Battle's favor as he was chipping away at Loosa, utilizing a ton of movement, long-range weapons, and it really seemed to be wearing down Loosa until we saw an unfortunate eye poke that stopped the fight and caused a no contest. Then in his next matchup against Gabriel Bonfim, we saw Bonfim just really touch him up and torch him on the feet after he shut down the grappling attempts that Loosa was trying to implement. Loosa is a very physical and strong fighter who normally looks to wrap his opponents up against the cage, drag them to the ground, and just grind them out from that top position, just as he showed in his matchup against Rhys McGee. He's a fighter that has some decent pop and power on his shots, and it's all about trusting his hands a little bit more so that his wrestling can flow a little bit easier behind it. I think we saw the archetype of fighter that will normally give him some troubles. Guys with good footwork, guys with solid range, and guys with good strength to deal with the strength that he brings into the table, especially once he gets into that clinch position where he looks to drag opponents to the ground. Rhys McGee was unable to deal with the strength, but guys like Munir Lazez and Gabriel Bonfim were able to keep fights upright and then really batter him from distance and chip away at him. Will Rowe be able to do the same thing here like Bonfim and Lazez did? I don't think so. I think Rowe struggles with the strength of Loosa in this spot, and I think we'll see Loosa punish him up against the cage, eventually drag him to the ground, and pretty much put on a similar performance to what he did against McGee. If Rowe can't establish his range, or if he can't throw up submissions off of his back, I think he's going to be very much in trouble here, allowing Loosa to just grind this fight out as he keeps Rowe in a defensive position for the entirety of this matchup, winning this fight on the scorecards. Our next up bantamweight matchup here. Fun fight between Ricky Simón, who comes in at -160, taking on the Canadian Charles Jourdain, who comes in at +140. Now, starting off on the Ricky Simón side of things, he seemingly saved his UFC roster spot last time around by pulling off a big upset and knocking out Javid Basharat. Now, that was a fight where I was pretty big on Basharat, as I thought he would be able to replicate what Mario Bautista, Song Yadong, and Vinicius Oliveira were all able to do against Ricky Simón. And that was able to stop the takedowns of Simón, which we saw Basharat effectively do, and then on the feet just pick him apart with a slow, tepid striking approach, just as we saw from Bautista and Song. But Basharat made one little slip up, and that allowed Simón to connect on a big shot to put Basharat away, ultimately allowing Simón to win that fight by knockout. We know Simón has some power in his shots, but it's all about his confidence. Similar to Phil Rowe in terms of, Ange Loosa, when guys are not, when they are able to just trust their power and let their hands go a little freely, they're able to connect with these big shots and let the rest of their game flow a little bit easier. And I think that's what Simón will really benefit from. If he just trusted his hands a little bit more, put together some combinations, threw a jab or two to set up his power shots to eventually, mask some level changes and takedown attempts behind it, he can be much more successful. And he's capable of doing that, even at 32 years old. He's a guy firmly in his prime, and even though he's coming off of a 3-fight losing streak, we saw in his last matchup he can still go out there and get his hand raised. Heavy wrestling, big power, solid athleticism, decent cardio. That's what we normally come to expect from a guy like Ricky Simón. Now he's going up against a very fun and the fan favorite, Charles Jourdain, who is coming off of a very impressive submission victory over Victor Henry last time around. Now, the impressive aspect of that was the fact that Henry had never been finished before. Not just submitted, but never knocked out either. And we saw Jourdain eventually catch him in a transition, utilizing his patented guillotine choke now, and force the tap from the veteran. And that's the best thing that we've found from Jourdain over his last couple of fights. He is a guy now that is looking to go out there and transform his game from not just being a flashy striker, but also having a very dangerous submission game where he's been able to, we've seen him get taken down. He's tried to work on his takedown defense, but it's when he's able to create those scrambles and eventually find the neck of his opponents and slap on that choke where guys just have such a difficult time working out of those positions, and either they're put to sleep or forced to tap out, like we've seen from Lando Venata, Ricardo Ramos, and Victor Henry, who are all, I believe, even Lando Venata, actually, I believe all these guys are BJJ black belts. So they know how to defend a guillotine, but Jourdain just finds those moments to latch onto those spots and force the tap from these veterans. Again, we know what to expect from Jourdain striking. Very fun, likes to throw with a lot of power, likes to throw with a lot of, fun, flashy techniques. And that's why he's become such a fan favorite amongst not just Canadians, but the entire MMA world. Now, in this matchup against Simón and Jourdain, it's obvious, right? Simón will likely try to use that power striking approach to get to his wrestling and try to overwhelm Jourdain by being the stronger and bigger fighter, or at least, stronger fighter. Jourdain, this will be his second fight down now at bantamweight, has a 3-inch height advantage in this matchup. Reach is pretty much a wash here. But I think we're going to see solid work from Jourdain, even if he ends up getting taken down here. What I love about him is that he just doesn't accept that back position. He's constantly working with throwing up submissions, looking for reversals, looking to work right back to his feet, or even creating scrambles where he eventually latches onto the neck of his opponents. He might be able to do that against Simón here. Simón has been submitted, but I believe it's been over 10 years since we've seen that loss from him. I'm still going to side ever so slightly with Jourdain. I think his just constant work rate, constant ability to land damage, even if he finds himself in defensive positions, I think that's going to be the difference maker here. And I think he's going to keep Simón from working and getting to a spot where he feels comfortable to let go with big shots. So I like Jourdain. I'm going to take him to win this by decision. I think it's all going to come down to being more damage-centric compared to the control-centric style that we're going to likely see from Simone here. And I'd also be very surprised if Simone is able to land a big enough shot to put Jourdain away. So look for Jourdain to control the striking, be active enough with the grappling, and eventually win this fight on the scorecards with more damage. All right, next up. Flyweights going at it here as we have hometown kid Cody Durden coming in at plus 160 going up against Jose Ochoa, who comes in at minus 185. Now, start off on the Durden side of things, who is now 2-3 over his last 5 fights. Last time coming up short against Joshua Van, who was able to shut down his wrestling game and just batter him over the course of the last 10 minutes of that fight to win the fight on the scorecards. We've seen where Durden struggles to get his wrestling game going. He often ends up coming up short in the striking realm. You know, that fight against Bruno Silva, he was having some success in the striking realm, but I think even with the momentum in his favor in that matchup, he got a little bit too lazy, and that's where Silva was able to land a nasty uppercut and eventually find the finish there. The match now fight, good fight for Cody Durden to apply his aggressiveness and eventually work for that submission to get the tap. And that's just Durden's game. The guy's very aggressive. He lacks some technical striking skills, but often utilizes a lot of aggression and power to try to make up for the technical flaws in his game. And that usually allows him to snatch the momentum from his opponents, mix in some well-timed takedowns as well to try to get some control time. But I think we've seen the ceiling in his game, especially over his last 5 fights. He needs that takedown to be really successful in a lot of his fights. Otherwise, he's going to get picked apart by better strikers, especially guys that can force him to strike with him, especially if they're able to just keep fights upright. And he might be facing that here in Jose Ochoa, who is a dark horse, high-level prospect. Now, the reason I say that is because in his last matchup against Lonnie Kavanaugh, which was his UFC debut, he found himself as a massive underdog. And he made that fight a lot closer than the odds indicated. 2 judges had that fight 1-1 going into the final round, and it was ultimately the power of Kavanaugh that separated him from Ochoa in the 3rd round of that matchup, earning Kavanaugh the win that night. But Ochoa showed to a lot of people that he can have a very successful UFC career, even with him at 24 years old. He trains out of the Shoot the Box Diego Lima camp alongside Charles Oliveira, Daniel Santos, and all those other crazy Muay Thai BJJ black belts, and he brings that style to the cage. He's very aggressive, has a lot of flashy shots, but he also knows how to throw those shots straight down the pipe to hurt his opponents. And I believe he finished every single one of his opponents coming up on the regional scene as well. I've kind of hammered on him for having a somewhat questionable strength of schedule en route to the UFC platform. But as we saw in the Kavanaugh fight, he rises to the level of his competition. And if he is better than them, he will often come out on top. And I think we'll see that on showcase this weekend against Cody Durden. I think Ochoa has an aggressive enough BJJ game to create enough scrambles to either get a reversal or work back to his feet should he get taken down here. And then as he starts chipping away at Durden on the feet, I think it will be harder for Durden to eventually get this fight to the ground. I think it's just a matter of time before Ochoa keeps hurting Durden and eventually setting up a club and sub opportunity for himself. But I think that Durden's aggressiveness will work very much against him here, against a guy in Ochoa who I believe is just better than him. I think he's slicker on the feet. I think he's a good enough grappler to deal with the wrestling onslaught of Durden and then eventually set up that submission where he should be able to choke out Durden and win this fight by submission. All right, another hometown kid, or at least home state kid, as we have Malcolm Wellmaker coming in at minus 1,300 for this bantamweight matchup, going up against the returning Chris Moutinho, who comes in at plus 775. Now, starting off on the Wellmaker side of things, he has a clean 9-0 record and made a successful UFC debut last time around, which I believe was just in April, where he knocked out Cameron Simon in just 2 minutes. We saw his crafty striking on display, utilizing good aggressiveness, walking Simon down, countering him effectively, and then eventually landing that big shot to put Simon down. And he didn't really even need to follow up with much ground and pound to eventually get the referee to step in and stop that fight. Wellmaker is very crafty. He's very skilled, especially in the striking realm where he puts combinations together very effectively and more often than not puts his opponents away. I've kind of harped on him in the past in terms of his striking defense, as he has been hittable in a couple of fights, but he's rolling with the shots very well. His durability is held up throughout his career, hence the flawless 9-0 record, and he continues to get better as he continues to take steps up in competition. His defensive grappling is very high level as well, and I'd be surprised if he faces much issues in the grappling realm until he starts fighting guys in the ranked portion of the bantamweight division. Now he takes on Chris Moutinho, who went 0-2 with the UFC back in 2021 after he made a short notice debut against a rising contender at the time, Sugar Sean O'Malley. We saw Moutinho get 10-8'd all across the first round. Second round looked just as bad, but maybe not a 10-8. And then in the third round, we saw a mercy stoppage in the dying seconds of the fight as it was a TKO loss, a standing TKO loss at the hands of O'Malley. Following that up, Moutinho ended up facing Guido Canetti in a matchup where he found himself as a small favorite. Unfortunately, Canetti connected with a big shot that hurt Moutinho, and then he followed up with a barrage of shots where we saw the referee eventually step in and stop that fight. Now, Moutinho's defense, I thought he deserved to at least continue that fight and try to work back into it. Obviously he was a little rocked, but it seemed like a spot where he could have come back from. And seeing how much energy Canetti expelled in that spot, I thought it would have been nice to see Moutinho try to work to get that comeback and try to pull off the win. But unfortunately for him, he takes the loss there and he quickly gets cut by the UFC, which I don't really understand. He did a obvious favor for the promotion, taking that short notice fight against O'Malley. They gave him one more shot against Canetti, and then they could have given him at least one more. Usually the UFC gives guys at least 3 shots to try to bounce back from a loss. If they're not able to get it done on the third time, I understand the cutting, but Moutinho, I don't think it was a viable cut, or deserving cut, I should say. But he ended up going back to the regional scene, going 5-0, finishing all 5 of his opponents, and most recently putting away a guy that had handed him his last loss before coming to the UFC, and Johnny Cupcakes Campbell, who's a well-known regional fighter for the diehards out there. Moutinho is a very aggressive striker who likes to put pressure on his opponents and just throwing combinations until he eventually breaks them and finds the finish himself. Now, I don't know if that aggressiveness was because he knew he was just so much better than the guys that he was fighting on the regional scene, and we might see him a little bit more muzzled and methodical against a guy like Wellmaker. But if he tried to utilize that aggressiveness here against Wellmaker, it could work in his favor if he's able to exploit some of the striking defenses from the young fighter in Wellmaker, or at least the lesser experienced fighter in Wellmaker. Or it works against him, and the perfect counter-striking approach of Wellmaker ends up finding that chin of Moutinho and putting him away there. So I'll never I will never advise parlaying somebody at minus 1,300. I'm assuming Wellmaker's KO prop is going to be something crazy like minus 400, minus 500. And as much as we say that Moutinho has crazy good durability and is a very tough fighter to put away, all 6 of his losses have actually come inside the distance. So he might show some solid durability because he's standing when he gets finished, but still not a good optic when he is the one getting barraged on, hence why the referees have stepped in and stopped some of his fights. And I think we'll see Wellmaker kind of replicate that. I was trying to get in on the under, which is roughly around even money and 1.5, but who knows? Maybe Moutinho's durability shows up here and wills him to the second and third round, and that's where Wellmaker ends up getting the finish. But I'm going to go Wellmaker here. I think he wins this matchup pretty convincingly. Moutinho might be able to take advantage of some of the striking defense flaws in Wellmaker's game, but I'd be surprised if it's to the point where he actually ends up pulling off the upset here. So I'm going to go Wellmaker and Wellmaker by knockout. All right, welterweight matchup now between veterans Michael Chiesa, who comes in at minus 400, taking on Court McGee, who comes in at plus 330. Now, starting off on the Chiesa side of things, he was on a pretty bad losing streak, 3 fights between 2021 and 2023, and that's where it really seemed like, he was questioning whether he was going to hang the gloves up. He's 37 years old, wasn't really looking like he was going to get back into title contention anytime soon, and he was taking the commentating gig pretty seriously as well, so it seemed like he was slowly shifting his attention to, more coverage of the sport than actually participating in it. But he managed to get off that winning streak or off that losing streak by finishing Tony Ferguson in the first round of their matchup and then grinding out Max Griffin until submitting him earlier this year, I believe it was, where he was able to find that submission in the third round of their matchup. We know he's a smothering grappler. He's a guy that likes to just apply pressure, utilizing a lot of kicks from distance until he can find the opening to change levels or at least crash the pocket with an initiation of the clinch. And then from there, he looks to work to the back of his opponents, where he's very dangerous with the rear naked choke and just threatening opponents with establishing a dominant position there and really working his way to getting that choke or even a TKO spot once he's able to get opponents to the ground. I was going up against a guy that's actually older than him here, a 40-year-old Court McGee, who's looking to build upon a submission victory over Tim Means from earlier this year, where he was able to quickly get to a dominant position, utilizing his physicality to bully Tim Means into a bad spot and eventually find that neck crank to force the tap. That also snapped a 3-fight losing streak for Court McGee, where he lost fights to guys like Jeremiah Wells, Matt Brown, and even Alex Morono, who was able to outpoint him en route to a decision victory. McGee is clearly slowing down, right? You can see it in his, his lack of athleticism at this stage of his career. He's still very strong. He's powerful. He can bully his way into positions, but he's slowing down with the technical aspects of his game. And that's where I think we're going to see Chiesa slowly start to, edge his way into a victory here. Do I agree that he should be minus 400 at 80%? Probably not. I think McGee is strong enough to really make this a little bit more difficult for Chiesa to get the positions that he needs, but I think it's just a matter of time before Chiesa gets those positions and slowly starts wearing McGee down, landing those big shots from the back position, working to a spot where he can get to a maybe a submission, but I think he ends up grinding this fight out, winning it on the scorecards. Yeah, I'm going to go Chiesa by decision, but minus 400 is a little bit wide for me and tough to trust these guys so late in their career. They can definitely be flaky. And McGee has that, that grittiness to make this a tougher fight for Chiesa than he's expecting. So that just gives me a little bit more pause than normal, but I'll still go with Chiesa as my prediction for this matchup. All right, light heavyweights up next year as we have a rebooking of a fight that was actually a co-main event for a fight a couple weeks ago, or an event that was supposed to be a couple weeks ago, where we got Paul Craig coming in at plus 285 going up against Rodolfo Bellato, who comes in at minus 350. Now, starting off on the Paul Craig side of things, who is now 1-4 over his last 5 fights, currently riding a 3-fight losing streak. Although those losses are coming to guys like Brendan Allen, Caio Borralho, and Bo Nickel. That Bo Nickel fight was a weird one, right? He made it a lot closer than people were expecting it to be, but I believe it was because of Bo Nickel's approach. Nickel didn't shoot a single takedown in that matchup, but rather looked to implement some of his striking improvements that he was trying to showcase, and Paul Craig was the perfect guy to try to showcase it against so that he can get those minutes and, that experience in, especially against a guy that's not as threatening in the striking realm like Paul Craig is. We know where Craig is the best, right? He wants to take opponents to the ground, utilize that BJJ black belt, and try to submit opponents, where he's been able to submit former champions Jamal Hill and even current champion Magomed Ankalaev in Ankalaev's UFC debut, if I'm not mistaken, or that might have been his second fight. But either way, very surprising outcome when Craig was able to force the tap from Ankalaev. But that's kind of been the pinnacle of Craig's career. And I think a lot of people are slowly figuring out his game, which is why he's currently on that 1-4 run. Keep this guy in the striking realm, stay away from the submission game, and you more than likely should be able to either finish him or just outpoint him. Now, talking about Rodolfo Bellato, coming off a draw against Jimmy Crute from, I believe, earlier this year. I believe there was a 10-8 in there somewhere. Very weird fight all around. Both guys hurting each other very badly. But Bellato, a guy that constantly goes into his fights as a big favorite, but ends up making fights a lot closer than they should be. The Ihor Potieria fight, nearly getting finished on several occasions in that fight, but managed to battle back, reverse positions, and then pound out an exhausted Ihor Potieria to end up getting the win there. He's a decent striker, good power, improving his wrestling and offensive wrestling game as well. His grappling game is really starting to come together, but I think on the feet is where he finds himself most dangerous. He's trained alongside the Teixeira MMA crew, training alongside, Alex Pereira and those guys, really looking to round out his game and just become a better fighter overall. And he should win this fight. This is a matchup where he should have no problem shutting down the grappling game of Craig. And then from there, really just putting the hurting on him with the striking advantage he has. it's just so flaky with Bellato at times, right? As such a big favorite, like minus 300, I understand. 350 is getting, starting to get away from the line a little bit. It's not a huge difference there, obviously, but still something you got to consider. But this is a fight where he should have no problem shutting down Craig's game, battering him on the feet, and then eventually finishing him with strikes. But again, this is a car crash of a fight, especially depending on how aggressive Craig wants to be here and if he can drag Bellato into that war that we constantly see Bellato in. But I'll go Bellato by knockout, probably within the first 10 minutes. All right. Sticking with light heavyweights now, we're going to go with Alonzo Menifield coming in at plus 425, going up against streaking and rising prospect Umar Sy, who comes in at minus 600. Now, starting off on the Menifield side of things, he's coming off of a decision victory over a short notice newcomer, Julius Walker, in a matchup which was very boring and very hard to watch again. It mostly took place inside the clinch with Walker looking for takedowns and then Menifield reversing the position and chipping away at him from there as Walker just was holding on to try to keep away from the power of Menifield. Menifield managed to land enough damage even while defending to win that fight on the scorecards, which I believe was a split decision. But, Menifield was unable to get to his power, which has often bailed him out of some bad spots and sticky spots, most notably against Dustin Jacoby. That was a fight where I thought he was losing a lot of the minutes of the rounds, but he landed big shots in 2 separate rounds to sway the judges in his favor so he can win that fight on the scorecards. But we've seen him come up short against Carlos Ulberg. We saw him get knocked out by Azamat Mirzakhanov in the second round, and it seems like his age and his wear and tear is slowly starting to catch up to him. Normally, he likes to command the pace of fights, start walking opponents down and landing big shots to try to knock them out. But we've also seen him try to take a clinch-heavy approach to wear his opponents down so that he can get back out into range and start letting go with his big power. I think we're starting to see a slowdown, and I think that last fight against Walker is a perfect example of it. Now, he's going up against a very tough stylistic matchup here in Umar Sy, who is now 2-0 with the UFC after that big win that he had over Dao Un Jung, where he was able to grind him out over 15 minutes, which was after his debut victory, where he submitted BJJ black belt Tuko Tokos in the first round of their matchup, I believe with a rear naked choke. But Sy is a very physically imposing fighter that does a great job in terms of corralling his opponents up against the cage, initiating the clinch, grinding them out there until he can eventually get the fight to the ground where he's able to do even better work and work to finishing positions. What I've also found very impressive about his game is the fact that he can go 15 minutes if he needs to. And I love the fact in his last matchup against Jung, he was in a very grueling clinch position to end off that matchup. And he took a quick look up at the clock to see how much time he had left to work. And it was about a minute left. And you see him quickly get in on a deeper takedown attempt and just power Jung to the ground. And from there, he was able to land some big shots. I believe Jung ended up reversing the position with just seconds left on the clock to, get a better, more dominant position. But there was just not enough time for Jung to get off and try to sway the judges back in his favor at that point. But Sy has good fight IQ, good recognition of, just awareness, offensive awareness, lands big shots and mixes in his takedown attempts very well behind it, knows how to, intelligently enter the pocket, enter the clinch exchanges, and really start wearing opponents down up against the cage. And then when he sees that opportunity to change levels and get opponents to the ground, he's very good with doing that as well. I expect this to be similar to Menifield's last fight, where it's just going to be a grueling clinching fest. But I think the younger, stronger fighter here in Sy will slowly wear Menifield down, get him to the ground, and punish him from that top position. I think Menifield will be harder to put away unless Sy lands a big shot on the feet. I think we see Sy just grind Menifield down. I think Menifield will showcase some decent resistance in terms of working back to his feet a few times, or at least keeping Sy from getting to a dominant position. But I think for the most part, Sy will win more minutes here, grind this fight out, and win it on the scorecards. I can understand the minus 600 line, and yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing if people wanted to parlay this spot. I know a lot of people are going to be looking to fade Sy here, right? You got the the proven-ish veteran here in Menifield going up against a rising contender who's continuing to add the strength of schedule to his record and still trying to prove himself. But I like the level of competition that he went up against on the regional scene and what he's showcased thus far through the UFC run that he's had. And I think that Menifield is a guy that he should be able to have an easy time with grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecards. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Mansour Abdul-Malik coming in at minus 800 going up against Cody Brundage, who comes in at plus 550. Now, starting off on the Abdul-Malik side of things, I believe he's finished every single one of his opponents, most of them in the first round. Done a great job in terms of utilizing his athleticism, power, and explosiveness to find those big shots and put his opponents away. And we saw some decent takedown defense and good defensive grappling work against Nick Klein last time around. Now, Klein actually won the first round on all three scorecards, if I'm not mistaken, but it came with the cost as it was clear that he started to slow down and he was not effective in the second round trying to hold Abdul-Malik up against the cage, which ultimately led to Abdul-Malik landing those big shots and getting the TKO finish. Abdul-Malik is learning to manage his gas tank a lot better. His takedown defense is, very much leveled up. He's done a great job in terms of just managing to keep fights upright and then just battering opponents on the feet, looking for the openings, exploding with accuracy, and hurting his opponents very, very badly. I think he has a high level, high ceiling as well, especially, being groomed by a guy like Eric Nixick, who knows how to morph these types of fighters into successful fighters. And I think that Abdul-Malik can fit that mold for him here. Continue to showcase good takedown defense, educated striking, and how to apply that power will definitely help Abdul-Malik get into the rankings in the middleweight division, where I don't think he'll face much resistance until he gets to about that top 10, top 8 of the division. And unfortunately for Cody Brundage, he finds himself nowhere near that ranking, even though he is 3-1 and 1 no contest over his last 4 fights or last 5 fights. I think it's clear that a lot of people can agree it should be 3-2 over his last 5 fights, especially after that unfortunate stoppage to the Abdul Razak Al Hassan fight. Actually, let's be honest, he should be 2-3 over his last 5 fights, especially when you take into consideration that DQ win he had over Jacob Malkoun to start this 5-fight run that he's on right now. But we saw him slam KO Zach Reese. We saw him get quickly submitted by Bo. Well, not quickly, actually. He put up a decent fight against Bo Nickel. I believe that was back at UFC 300. He eventually got worn down and submitted in the second round of that matchup. We saw him get quickly hurt by Al Hassan, but, utilizing that usual Cody Brundage defense of just digging his head into the ground and, trying to save himself from getting hit cleanly. Credit to him for even being that aware, but constantly getting hit in the back of the head. Fighters need to find a better way to just hurt Brundage and find better ways to maybe just make him work back to his feet and hurt him again on the feet. That's probably the best way to finish him. And then that Julian Marquez fight. Crazy back and forth matchup. He ends up coming out on top with that big TKO win near the ending of that first round. Probably round of the year, if we're being honest. But again, in this matchup, I think he's kind of screwed. I think the explosivity, the power, the speed of Abdul-Malik will allow him to land that big shot against Brundage here. And I'd kind of be surprised if Brundage is able to eat up enough of the clock like Nick Klein did against Abdul-Malik if he's looking to take Abdul-Malik to the ground, pushing him up against the cage. But I think we'll see Abdul-Malik shut that down. I think he's just too athletic, too physical, too strong. And I think he'll force Brundage to strike with him. And then from there, I think it's just a matter of time before Abdul-Malik lands that big shot, eventually finds that big shot to just put Brundage down, put him away. And I think this all happens within a round and a half. Last time I looked at the total, we were able to get minus 175, minus 170. I think that's a fine line. I think that's a great line to shoot on. Yeah, I think Abdul-Malik runs over Cody Brundage here, finishes him in the first round by knockout. Next up in the bantamweight division, we have former champion Cody Garbrandt coming in at plus 145, going up against Raoni Barcelos, who comes in at minus 170. Now, Starting off on the Garbrandt side of things, he came up short against Davison Figueiredo, I believe back at UFC 300, where he did a good job in the first round of stopping the takedowns of Figueiredo and really landing some good shots on the feet until Figueiredo eventually got the fight to the ground in the second round, and that's where Figueiredo was able to land that submission and force the tap from Garbrandt. Now, Garbrandt is slowly looking to get to that place where he had that uber confidence to let his hands go a little bit more rather than being too scared to be clipped by a big shot and being put away by his opponents. We saw Rob Font outwork him. We saw Kai Kara-France land the big shot to put him away. We saw him take a very tepid-paced approach against Trevin Jones to just chip away at him and eventually win that fight on the scorecards. We saw him land a big shot against Brian Kelleher and finish him. So he's capable of having some good performances still. And he's still yet 33 years old, right? So he's still a guy that's close enough to his prime to have some good performances. It just depends on the type of opponent he's going up against. At his best, he has slick combinations, good footwork, and decent striking defense. And his defensive grappling normally has held up for him, but it's all about finding that confidence again so he can perform at a very high level. Now, he's going up against Raoni Barcelos, who pulled off one of the bigger upsets that we've seen in recent years as he was able to nullify Peyton Talbot on the mat and grind him out with a grapple-heavy approach, grinding out 2/3 of that 15-minute fight to clearly win that fight on the scorecards. Barcelos took that chance to remind people that he is still a very difficult and dangerous fighter even at 38 years old. He has a nasty Muay Thai approach, but also a patented wrestling game he can lean on if he feels he has a big enough advantage in that realm over his opponents, just like he did against Peyton Talbot. The fight before that against Christian Quinones, that was a very close fight that Barcelos managed to keep the scorecards out of it by submitting Quinones, I believe, in the last round of that fight, or it was the second round. But regardless, Barcelos, I believe, is a guy that has slowly started to slow a bit. And guys that have that speed advantage against him and can keep him from his wrestling game are going to be able to batter him on the feet, just like we saw Kyler Phillips do and just as we saw Umar Nurmagomedov do. Barcelos can strike, and he's very dangerous inside the pocket, but if he's dealing with somebody with a faster striking game than him, then it's going to be harder for him to get in on those pocket exchanges and come out with some maximum effect or maximum damage compared to what his opponents are able to inflict against him. Now, in this matchup, it seems like the public is slowly starting to pour in on the Raoni Barcelos side. Right, Barcelos was closer to -140 just yesterday and now finds himself at -170. So it seems like people believe that he could either replicate what Figueiredo was able to do against Garbrandt, or he can land a big enough shot to put Garbrandt away. But I find myself slowly on the other side. I think Garbrandt's takedown defense should be good enough to keep this fight upright. And then on the feet, I think he's the better, more methodical striker. It's all about utilizing that speed and that footwork to try to stay away from the counters of Barcelos or even some of the big shots that Barcelos is going to be looking to unleash, while Garbrandt is looking for the openings that he needs to get the shots that he needs off. So I could see Garbrandt slowly taking the approach that he took against Trevin Jones, where he just takes his time, picks Barcelos apart from distance, and does not engage too much in the clinch or in the pocket. Or he does utilize his speed and power to find that big shot on Barcelos and put Barcelos away the way that a lot of people are expecting Peyton Talbot to do. So I wouldn't overlook Garbrandt at all in this spot. If this line continues to widen, maybe my confidence starts to gain as well on Garbrandt. It's not all that high where I'm, overly excited to take +145. I'll see if this line continues to widen. But I'm going to pick Garbrandt to win this matchup. I'm going to take him to win by decision, despite outpointing Barcelos from distance with a speedy striking game to get the win. Next up in the middleweight division, we got Edmund Shahbazyan coming in at -200, going up against Andre Petroski, who comes in at +170. Now, I fully believe this is a striker versus grappler matchup, and I think anybody could tell you that, right? You got Shahbazyan, was very good in the striking realm, very nasty with the speed and power that he's able to put together, and he's often very front-loaded on his success, right? His wins over Dulce Lungiambula, AJ Dobson, Dylan Budka. I think the Lungiambula fight or win actually came in the second round, but he benefited from a guy having a worse gas tank than he did. But finishing Dobson, first round, Budka, first round as well. Even Gerald Meerschaert, nearly finishing him in that fight until he ended up gassing himself out and getting submitted by the veteran there. And that's where the youngster, 27 years old still needs to rein things in and figure out why he's continuously gassing himself out and opponents are able to get the better of him and drown him in those deep waters. If he just stays a little bit more methodical with his striking, doesn't follow guys to the ground when they get hurt, maybe he's able to just one punch knock them out rather than having to muster up all this energy to try to get that ground and pound finish over some of these guys who are able to survive just like Gerald Meerschaert did. But on the feet, he's one of the better fighters of the division. He's very slick, very calculated, very accurate with his shots. It's just being able to land those shots early enough before the cardio ends up catching up to him. And I love that he ended up leaving Edmund Tavardian several years ago, shacking up with the guys over there at Extreme Couture. Obviously, Eric Nixick doing a very good job in terms of rounding out his skill set. It just comes down to performing inside the cage once he actually gets there. Now, he's going up against Andre Petroski, who's currently riding a solid 3-fight winning streak over guys like Josh Fremd, Dylan Budka, and last time around, utilizing a striking heavy approach and utilizing his patented grappling from a defensive perspective to keep the BJJ wizardry of Rodolfo Vieira at bay. Petroski outpointed him on the feet and clearly won that fight on the scorecards, and it was a very impressive performance from the grappler. Normally, Petroski looks to utilize his strength and his power to just wear opponents down against the cage, look to drag them to the ground and just smash them from that top position. He's a guy similar to Edmund Shahbazyan that I've harped on in the past in terms of having very bad cardio, very bad gas tank management, but he goes out there and continuously wins fights on the scorecards, proving me wrong time and time again. So I'm off the train of this guy having a bad gas tank, but more so on the train of him just being a little bit smarter in terms of how to expend his energy a little bit better than he has been showing in the past. Now, this is a tough one, right? Either Shahbazyan starches Petroski early, or Petroski utilizes that power to crash the pocket effectively, get a hold of Shahbazyan, start pushing him against the cage and wearing him down, looking to take him to the ground and smothering him from that top position. I don't normally like leaning on guys that need that first round shot to hurt their opponents and put them away, which is why I have to lean even at dog odds now on Petroski. I think that this is a spot where he can just really wrangle Shahbazyan against the cage and just wear him down. Dirty boxing, knees up the middle, takedowns, mat returns. I think it's all possible for Petroski here. The other funny thing I found about this matchup is how it's all lined, right? You got Shahbazyan at minus 200. You got the under 1.5 at plus 140, which doesn't make sense to me, right? If Shahbazyan wins, more than likely it looks like him knocking out Petroski early and getting that round 1 win or early round 2 victory. Because if this fight starts creeping into deeper water, I think it means that Petroski has kept Shahbazyan away from his striking and was able to successfully wrangle him against the cage, drag him to the ground, and just wear him down. So I think this is one of those spots where you can take that money line on Petroski or that plus money on the under and still scrape a little bit of profit in this matchup. But I am going to go Petroski here. I think that this is a matchup where he can successfully grind Shahbazyan out. I think it's also possible that he can find a round 3 finish. So if that's juicy enough, that's something I would consider here. But I think Petroski ends up avoiding the early danger that Shahbazyan presents, grinds him out, and wins this fight on the scorecards. All right, that brings us to our women's flyweight co-main event here, as we have former strawweight champion Rose Namajunas coming in at minus 280, going up against rising contender Miranda Maverick, who comes in at plus 240. Now, starting off on the Namajunas side of things, she ended up losing a 5-round co-main event slot against Erin Blanchfield back in November in a fight that did not go the way that I expected it to. And I say that more so as I thought Namajunas would have her best success in championship rounds, yet it was Blanchfield that clearly won the last 3 rounds of that fight to win that fight on the scorecards. Namajunas did a good job in the first 2 rounds, utilizing her striking advantage and keeping Blanchfield away from her grappling, but Blanchfield eventually got to it in the 3rd round, utilized the threat of the grappling in the 3rd round to outstrike Namajunas, and then eventually in the 5th round get back to her grappling where it looked like Namajunas was a fish off of her back, or maybe just gassed out and unable to get off on any success, leading to Blanchfield winning that fight on the scorecards. And that's kind of been the wild card and weird thing and inconsistent thing in Namajunas' game, is sometimes we've seen her showcase some good grappling defense where she's able to work back to her feet, throw up submissions, or even create scrambles for reversals or submission opportunities. And then there's other fights where she just looks a little bit too defeated off of her back, allowing opponents to grind her up from that top position. that's kind of the wild card that you come in with Namajunas in her fights, not knowing which side of her is going to show up. But one thing is for certain, when she gets into her groove in the striking realm, she's usually very difficult to put away. Now she's going up against a streaking Miranda Maverick, who has managed to bounce back after a 2023 loss to Jasmine Jazz Davicius, winning 4 straight fights, finishing one of them to Priscilla Cachoeira, where she was able to submit her. But last time around, I believe also in November, she went up against Jamie Lynn Horth, and we saw her win the first round, give up the second round by getting controlled, but ultimately bouncing back in the third round to win that fight on the scorecards. Maverick is always working on her striking game, which is more so a means to an end to eventually drag fights to the ground, where she's very good grinding opponents out from that top position and looking to either control her opponents or work to a spot where she can eventually finish them. Now, the intriguing factor in this matchup is that these two fighters have trained alongside each other for a very long time. They've had dozens of sparring sessions with one another, and only one of them will know who truly gets the better of the other in those spots. The strength of Maverick gives me some pause here in terms of being uber confident on the chalky spot with Namajunas. Namajunas, without a doubt, is the better striker here. But should this fight get tied up in the grappling realm, there are spots that Maverick could have some success with controlling Namajunas, especially if we get the Namajunas that is not so resilient off of her back. So, this minus 240 line is a little intriguing. Not so much to the point of making me believe that Maverick is the rightful prediction for this fight. I think Namajunas' strength of schedule, her striking advantage, and knowing that she needs to be very urgent in these grappling exchanges make me want to predict her to win this fight on the scorecards. But that plus 240 line is a little bit too good to overlook here. So even if it's a little bit of a sprinkle to even just win one unit on Maverick, I think it's worth a shot considering the grappling and physicality upside she has in this fight. But Namajunas should know all this, and she only has 15 minutes where she needs to worry about it. I think she can at least outdamage Maverick for 2 of those rounds and win this fight on the scorecards. But, nearly 75% indicated for Namajunas, I don't think is accurate here, but I still think she wins this matchup, and I think she wins it on the scorecards. All right. That brings us to our main event of the evening now in the welterweight division. Similar stakes to the co-main event here, as we have a former champion in Kamaru Usman, who's actually riding a 3-fight losing streak, coming in on a plus 210 underdog, going up against a streaking Joaquin Buckley, who is sitting at minus 250. Now, starting off on the Usman side of things, it's been a rough go for him ever since he lost his title to Leon Edwards at the ending of 2022, where he got knocked out with that head kick heard around the world in the dying minutes of round 5 in a fight that he was clearly winning. He then ended up rematching Leon Edwards a few months later and could not get off on his wrestling game whatsoever, as Edwards had improved his takedown defense enough and then out-damaged Usman on the feet. Then Usman took off a little bit of time and came back on short notice up a weight class against Khamzat Chimaev, and he put up a pretty damn good fight in that spot, ending up losing that fight by majority decision. But to me, it seems like age is slowly catching up to Kamaru Usman. He's 38 years old. We've always heard about his brittle knees and the fact that he can't really run or go for road work because of the damage that it would cause on his knees and the constant injuries that he's had to go through at this stage of his career. It only gets worse for a 38-year-old. So trying to come back and go up against the youngsters of the division who are trying to take over is going to be a very tough task for him to overcome. I've largely thought that Usman was one of the best welterweights of all time, but that's when he could apply that high-pace, high-volume style, which I don't know if he's capable of doing at this stage of his career. His durability has become a big question mark. His cardio is starting to become a little bit of a question mark, but I'm not willing to fully write him off, considering his 2 losses came to guys like Leon Edwards and Khamzat Chimaev. Now, he's going up against a very, hot Joaquin Buckley, who's been nothing but in the green since moving down to welterweight and really changing things around in his career. He's 6-0 since making the move, finishing 4 of those opponents and racking up high-level wins over guys like Vicente Luque, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and the last time around, finishing Kobe Covington in December. He's gone from being just a headhunter to a guy that's been able to mix in the grappling when he needs to a guy that's been even very methodical with his striking approach to just hurt opponents and just wear them down and not gassing himself out early trying to finish them and then, just holding on for dear life later on in matchups. We saw him take an educated grappling approach against a much taller and much longer Nursultan Raziboyev. We saw him really pressure Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and eventually knock him out there. And then we saw him shut down Covington's game and eventually get that TKO stoppage in the third round of that matchup. And I feel like this might play out similar to the Covington matchup, where the speed and power of Buckley may end up being the difference maker here. Again, I don't want to completely count out Usman, as his losses are legitimate losses, but it seems like the pendulum is really starting to swing to the Buckley side of things, especially with his sky-high confidence, his youth advantage, his power advantage, possible strength advantage. We know that his defensive wrestling has improved more than enough for him to likely shut down that style of Usman, or at least keep Usman from getting off on too much control time here. And I think it's just a matter of time before Buckley ends up landing a big shot and putting Usman away by knockout. I feel like I'm going to be kicking myself if Usman ends up winning this matchup, but I likely won't end up biting on this line. I'll see if enough Usman love comes in during fight week that we get Buckley at a better betting line, but at minus 250, I'd rather pass here. I'll take Buckley to win this fight by knockout. Yeah, but who knows? Maybe Usman has one last run in him. I just don't think so. I don't think he'll get past Buckley here. All right, there you guys go. Full card breakdown for this UFC Atlanta card. Again, busy week up ahead. We got a ton of other cards. I believe there's 4 other events. 4 other events. 2 of those will be broken down on this YouTube page, so stay tuned for that. The PFL one should be out for you guys on Monday evening / afternoon, so stay tuned for that. It's nice to finally have my computer chair back, as you guys can see, slowly building out the studio. Got my knickknacks here, got my CN Tower and some of my old round 5 figurines that I want to put on display, but the rest of this will slowly start working itself out, especially the lighting over the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned for that stuff. But yeah, we're back in full swing, back on schedule. Sunday drop for the Lockcast, but I'll be back tomorrow again for the PFL as well as the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. I'll see you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.